Back in September of 2017, for whatever reason, these creepy clown sightings kept getting reported all across America. Real or fake, videos of them would constantly get posted somewhere online. For that entire month, it was all over the news. I remember in our town specifically, it kind of spiraled out of control. People in the area were committing actual crimes while wearing clown masks, or sometimes full clown costumes. It was honestly terrifying. Anyway, back when this was happening, I was a sophomore in high school. Throughout that whole month, many of the staff and student school emails received direct threats. They were always sent from different random email addresses, so there was no real way of blocking them. The sender, names were always something like Killer Clown at MLK or Clown Terror 99. It usually had the words Killer Clown followed by some random numbers or letters. It got so bad that the school administration had to send out a mass email to all students and parents, saying they were aware of the threats and were taking them very seriously. I remember some days the teachers were instructed to keep their classroom doors locked at all times. They weren't even allowed to step out to use the restroom. Needless to say, a lot of us were constantly on edge. I have no shame in admitting it was genuinely scary. I saw some of the things these emails were saying. A lot of it was really graphic and truly disturbing. Of course, at the time, none of us knew if anyone was actually planning to act on these threats, or if it was just some sicko behind a computer screen playing a twisted joke. But honestly, it felt like only a matter of time before something would actually happen. And finally, one day, something did. I was in my algebra class when the school's lockdown alarm suddenly went off. Principal Carter's voice then came over the loudspeaker. His voice was shaky, almost trembling. Now, our principal was a pretty intimidating guy. Former military, tall, always serious. So hearing genuine fear in his voice only amplified my own panic. I knew immediately that this lockdown had to be related to the threats. In that classroom, there wasn't really a good corner for all of us to hide in. You could see a large portion of the room through the door's window. So our teacher quickly ordered us to barricade the door using all the desks and chairs in the room. We stacked them as high and tight as we could. He then had us sit as far away from the door as possible. Although even from there, we still had a clear view of the glass window. I watched as all the lights abruptly shut off in the hallway, shortly followed by the lights in our classroom going dark. The school had cut the power. It was eerie. The whole building was silent, and there wasn't the usual whispering or nervous joking around from other students, like there normally was during practice drills. Even our teacher had a visible look of fear on his face, which only put me more on edge. We sat there, in the dark for several minutes. Then we heard a loud, metallic banging sound, like someone was slamming the lockers down the hall with something heavy. A voice started, yelling, muffled, but aggressive. The girl sitting next to me quietly began crying. The noises continued off and on for the next few minutes. As time passed, the sounds kept getting louder, as whoever was making them seemingly kept getting closer to our classroom. At this point, my classmates and I were staring at each other, all of us silently gauging each other's reactions. Then came the sound of our classroom door handle rattling violently. I looked up. Through the glass window on the door, I saw a pale white clown mask staring in. Big red nose, exaggerated smile, hollow black eyes. The person stood there for a while, not moving, just staring. Then they roughly ducked down out of view, and the sound of the door handle rattling continued. They were trying to pick the lock. We all sat there, frozen, listening to this happen, when suddenly, the lock disengaged with a loud click. Immediately, the full body weight of this person slammed into the door. The desks barricading it shifted back a few inches with a horrible scraping sound. This happened a few more times, each impact louder and more forceful than the last, but the barricade held. Not much progress was made. Eventually, they gave up. We could hear their footsteps running away down the hall, fading into the distance. When police finally arrived, they cleared the building floor by floor and escorted all of us outside to the parking lot. No one was ever found or arrested in connection with the lockdown. It's believed that at least 2 people dressed in clown costumes entered through the back service entrance of the school that day, intent on making good on the threats that had been sent over email. At the time, the school did have some security cameras, but since they cut the power during the lockdown, nothing useful was ever captured. School was canceled for the next 3 days. When we finally came back, the school had installed new auto-locking doors on every classroom, along with reinforced glass windows and additional security cameras that ran on backup power. This happened back in 2014. I had graduated college the year before, with a degree in education. I wanted to be a teacher and was lucky enough to land a job at a high school about 20 minutes from where I lived. The first few weeks, I was shadowing another teacher, as they called it. It was meant to help me prepare to teach my own classes, but it really just felt like a glorified teacher's assistant position. I would sit in the class with the other students and help the lead teacher whenever needed. It was a biology class, and on one of the lab days, we required those glass beakers used for chemical reactions. Measuring solutions and stuff like that, all that type of equipment was kept in a supply closet on the opposite side of the building. I made my way out of the classroom and started heading over. There, after about 3 minutes of walking, I arrived and began searching for the beakers on the shelves. All of a sudden, my phone buzzed. It was an automated text message from the school. Being part of the staff, we were required to sign up to receive these emergency alerts. The text explained that the school was going into lockdown and that it was not a drill. By the time I would have made it back to my classroom, the door would have likely already been locked, so I decided to hide in the supply closet by myself. I turned off the light and quietly closed the door behind me. There wasn't much room to sit down. I had to just stand there in the dark, surrounded by shelves stacked with lab supplies. After a few seconds, the lockdown alarm sounded from the speakers throughout the building. The usual ambient noise from inside nearby classrooms, voices, movement, immediately died down. It was now completely silent. Breaking that silence was the sound of my phone buzzing again. It was an update. It read, "Please remain in lockdown. A suspected armed intruder has entered the building. Police have been notified." I could feel my heart rate picking up. My hands were shaking. I didn't feel safe where I was. Suddenly, I heard running footsteps in the hallway. Fast, heavy, frantic. They ran right up to the supply closet door and stopped. The door handle turned, and the door swung open before I even had time to react. Standing there was an older man, maybe in his mid-50s. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and dark jeans. I'd never seen this man before in my life. He looked directly at me and asked if he could hide in here with me. Feeling bad for the guy, and honestly too shocked to say no, I said yes. There wasn't much room at all, but we both squeezed inside. I pulled the door shut again. The man explained in a low voice that he had been teaching a class down the hall when he heard the lockdown alarm go off. In my mind, this immediately raised a red flag. Why then? Was he here, alone in a supply closet, instead of with his class? I asked him this. He didn't respond right away, just stared at me. The silence between us was unbearable. Interrupting that silence was, once again, the sound of my phone buzzing. It was another update from the school. The text said, "Do not open your classroom doors for any reason. The suspect is believed to be an older male with a gray beard. Remain silent and stay hidden." I frantically reread the words on my screen, my stomach dropping. I didn't get the best look at this guy in the darkness, but from what I could see, he fit that description. Older, gray beard, plain clothes. I could distinctly hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. I made a split-second decision. I shoved the door open and ran. I sprinted straight down the hallway toward the nearest exit and out into the parking lot. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I got there, I looked back behind me, breathing hard. I didn't see anything. I don't think the man followed me, or at least, he didn't follow me outside. From there, I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away from the school. I'd say around 30 minutes later, I received a final update text explaining that the police had cleared the building and that the lockdown was over. I later learned that a man had gotten inside the school by convincing the front office staff that he was there to pick up his son early for a dentist appointment. A lockdown was called when a hallway monitor spotted a gun holster clipped to his waistband as he was walking toward the main stairwell. Several teachers reported that their classroom doors had been forcefully pushed or kicked during the lockdown. Someone had been trying to force their way inside. The man was gone by the time police arrived, and they were never able to identify him. He was caught on the school's security cameras, but the footage never showed a clear view of his face. He kept his head down or turned away from the cameras. However, the videos did confirm that he was indeed armed. I saw the footage myself later, and I'm almost certain it was the same man who had been hiding with me in that supply closet. It was dark in there, so I can't be 100% sure, but the build, the clothes, the beard, it all matched. To this day, I still don't know what his intentions were, or why he asked to hide with me. Maybe he was looking for a hostage, Maybe he was just trying to blend in. All I know is that I got out of there, and I'm grateful I trusted my gut when I did. Every year, our school is required to conduct at least 2 lockdown drills. But our principal back then would always schedule more, like 4 or 5 times a year. So by my junior year, I was pretty used to the whole routine. The teachers would always give us a heads up the day before to avoid any unnecessary panic. That Tuesday morning, as I walked into my first period class, my geography teacher informed us that the school would be running a lockdown drill later that day. Honestly, I didn't mind them much because it meant we'd get a break from classwork for the 25 or 30 minutes they usually took. About 35 minutes into class, a short buzzer sounded, followed by Principal Henderson's voice coming through the intercom. Like every other drill, he explained that the school was going into lockdown mode, but that it was only a practice drill. He made sure to remind us that if there were ever a real lockdown, the buzzer would sound for much longer, around 2 full minutes, and there would be no intercom announcement whatsoever. Our teacher instructed all of us to close the blinds and move to the corner of the classroom that couldn't be seen from the hallway door. She then turned off the lights and locked the door. For the next several minutes, we sat in complete silence. Eventually, we heard footsteps echoing outside in the corridor. It was Principal Henderson, going from door to door, testing each one to make sure they were properly locked and that every class was following lockdown protocol correctly. Before I knew it, the drill was over and we went back to our normal routine. The day went on, and I was now sitting in my chemistry class, which was right after lunch period. At some point, I excused myself to use the restroom. Now, our school building had a lower level. Most people called it the basement. Down there, they had a restroom that was way more private and a lot less crowded, so I would always try to use that one instead of the main bathrooms upstairs. There were a few storage rooms and a couple of unused classrooms down there, so it didn't look suspicious for me to head down. I was sitting in one of the back stalls. I was the only one in there, which was usually the case. All of a sudden, I heard the lockdown buzzer start blaring from outside in the hallway. It rang for what felt like a full 2 minutes before it abruptly cut off. I waited for Principal Henderson's voice to come over the speakers, but it never did, which, like I mentioned earlier, was supposed to indicate a real lockdown. At first, I didn't really think it was legitimate. It seemed too coincidental to happen so soon after the practice drill that morning. I figured it was just a second phase of the drill or something. But as I sat there for a few more minutes, I started to realize that if that were the case, it probably would have been explained over the intercom beforehand. I started to panic now, thinking this was actually real. I wasn't safe in the bathroom. The door had no lock, so I bolted outside to try and find a classroom to hide in. There weren't many options down in that basement. It was also hard to see now that they'd turned the hallway lights off. I eventually found a classroom door and tried the handle. It was locked. I looked through the small glass window on the door. In one of the far corners, I could barely make out a student crouched down, hiding. There was a class inside. I banged on the door, explaining that I was a student and needed somewhere to hide. I got no response. I was both terrified and frustrated at the same time. I realized the protocol was to never let anyone inside, no matter what, even if they claimed to be a student. I was on my own. I thought about going back to the bathroom, but then I spotted an empty computer lab nearby and decided on that instead. I crawled under one of the desks in the back corner, and for the second time that day, I sat in complete silence. Only this time, it was for a real lockdown. 12 minutes went by, nothing, not even an update over the intercom. Then came the heart-dropping sound of running. Footsteps from outside, someone sprinting down the basement. Stairwell. I could hear the person's heavy, frantic breathing. The footsteps kept getting closer. Now it sounded like they were just outside the room. I started adjusting my body, trying to duck down even more, trying to get further out of view, when suddenly, a light turned on. It was the computer monitor on the desk above me. Waking up, I must have accidentally pulled the mouse cable. It wasn't super bright, but it was enough for me to make out a silhouette standing in the doorway. I genuinely feared for my life in that moment. The person just stood there, motionless. I prayed they wouldn't enter the room, and after what felt like an eternity, they turned and continued running down the hallway. A few minutes later, the lockdown was lifted. The school tried to keep the incident under wraps, but word eventually got out. Apparently, a kid in my grade, someone I actually vaguely knew, had stolen his father's handgun and entered the school through a rear exit door that he'd left propped open earlier in the day. Police arrived at the school and detained him before any shots were fired. They later searched his backpack and found a folded piece of paper with a list of names on it. Names of people they believe he intended to target that day. Photos of that list eventually leaked online. My name was number 3 on that list. I don't know if the kid just got scared and decided not to go through with it, or if he genuinely couldn't find anyone after entering the building. Either way, I'm convinced that the person I saw while hiding in that computer lab was him, and I truly believe I could have lost my life in that moment. This happened during my senior year of high school, back in the spring of 2018. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and I was sitting in my English literature class, 4th period. Right before lunch, our regular teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was out sick that day, so we had a substitute. The guy introduced himself as Mr. Brennan when he walked in that morning. He seemed normal enough at first, maybe in his early 40s, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He had this kind of nervous energy about him, though, like he kept glancing at the door every few minutes. About halfway through the period, he was having us work on some reading assignment when he suddenly stood up from the desk and walked over to the door. He locked it. A few students looked up, confused, but nobody said anything. I figured maybe he just didn't want students from the hallway peeking in or interrupting. Some substitutes were weird about that stuff. But then he walked over to the windows and closed all the blinds. Now, people were starting to whisper. "Mr. Brennan, why are you closing the blinds?" someone asked. He turned around and looked at us with this really serious expression. "Just a precaution," he said quietly. "I heard something on the radio this morning about threats being made against schools in the district. Better safe than sorry." That made everyone go silent. We all just kind of looked at each other nervously. He went back to the desk and sat down, but he kept staring at the door. His leg was bouncing up and down anxiously. The classroom felt tense now. Nobody was really focusing on the assignment anymore. Then, about 10 minutes later, the lockdown alarm went off. It blared through the speakers for a solid 2 minutes before cutting off abruptly. No announcement, no explanation. Several students gasped. A girl near the front started crying immediately. Mr. Brennan stood up fast, almost knocking his chair over. "Everyone, get away from the windows and the door. Now, move to the back corner." We all scrambled to the back of the room, huddling together. My hands were shaking. He turned off the lights and crouched down near the front of the room, staring at the door like he was expecting something. "Stay quiet," he whispered sharply. "Do not make a sound." We sat there in the dark for what felt like forever. I could hear my own breathing. Someone next to me was trembling. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They stopped right outside our door. The door handle jiggled slightly, like someone was testing it. Mr. Brennan didn't move. He just stared at the door, completely frozen. Then came 3 loud knocks. "Hello? Is anyone in there? This is Principal Dawson. I need to check that everyone is safe." It sounded like our principal's voice, but something about it felt off. The tone was too flat, too emotionless. Nobody moved. Nobody answered. Mr. Brennan slowly shook his head at us, signaling us to stay silent. The knocking came again, harder this time. "I need you to open this door right now. It's protocol." Still, Mr. Brennan didn't respond. He just kept staring at the door, his jaw clenched. After a long pause, the footsteps moved on, fading down the hallway. We all let out a collective breath. But then, maybe 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out as quietly as I could. It was an automated alert from the school. "Lockdown in effect. Armed individual in the building. Do not open doors for anyone, even if they claim to be staff. Police en route." My stomach dropped. I looked up at Mr. Brennan. He was still crouched by the door, staring at it intensely. I leaned over and whispered to the girl next to me, showing her my phone. Her eyes went wide, and she passed the message along to the others. Within seconds, everyone in the back corner had seen it. That's when one of the guys in my class, Tyler, spoke up in a loud whisper. "Mr. Brennan, how did you know? How did you know to lock the door and close the blinds before the alarm even went off?" Mr. Brennan turned his head slowly to look at us. His face was hard to read in the dim light. "I told you," he said quietly. "I heard something on the radio," but his voice wavered. And now that I was really looking at him, I noticed he was sweating. A lot. Tyler wasn't letting it go. "The alarm went off like 15 minutes after you locked the door. That doesn't make sense. How did you know?" A few other students were nodding now, looking at Mr. Brennan with suspicion. He stood up abruptly. "I was trying to keep you safe," he said, his voice rising slightly. "That's all I've been doing, keeping you safe." "Then why won't you show us your school ID?" Tyler pressed. Substitutes are supposed to wear them. Mr. Brennan didn't answer. He just stared at Tyler for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked over to the desk, grabbed his briefcase, and moved toward the door. "Wait, what are you doing?" someone asked, panicking. "I need to check on something," he said flatly, unlocking the door. "No, don't open it," a girl shouted. But he pulled the door open anyway and stepped out into the hallway, closing it behind him. We all just sat there, frozen, staring at the door. Nobody knew what to do. A few minutes later, we heard shouting from somewhere down the hall, deep, authoritative voices yelling commands. It sounded like police, then silence again. Eventually, the lockdown was lifted. Real police officers and school staff went room to room, escorting students out of the building. When they got to our classroom, we explained everything about Mr. Brennan, about how he locked the door before the alarm, about how he left during the lockdown. The officer's face went pale. "There was no substitute assigned to this classroom today," he said. "Mrs. Patterson called in sick this morning, but the school hadn't arranged a replacement yet." My blood ran cold. They later found out that someone had entered the building early that morning posing as a substitute teacher. He had a fake ID badge and had signed in at the front desk. Before anyone realized something was wrong, they believe he was the one who triggered the lockdown, possibly. As a diversion or to create chaos, he was never found. The police searched the building and surrounding area, but he had vanished. To this day, I still don't know what his plan was, or why he spent an entire class period with us, keeping us safe. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe we were never his target, or maybe, and this is what keeps me up at night, maybe he was waiting for something, and we just got lucky.